this video, I'm going to show you the processes that I use to make sourdough loaves and bake them in the wood-fired oven. In the first part of the video, we're going to go through the processes of making the dough, forming the loaves, and getting them ready for baking the following day in the oven. In the morning, we will come out and fire the oven and get the oven through its processes that it needs to get to the point where it can bake the loaves for us. So let's get started. We're going to be making 4 loaves of 10% spelt flour sourdough bread. The main ingredients for this is water, my sourdough starter, sea salt. I'm using King Arthur's bread flour, and 1 degree organic sprouted spelt flour. Okay, for the recipe for this, or the formula for this, we're using 532 grams of starter. The starter is at 100% hydration, which means it's got equal parts of flour and water in it. So I'm going to be looking for 532 grams. I started to build this up a day and a half or so ago. And we're looking for 532, give or take a little bit. There we go, 532. Next, first I want to tear that to 0. The next I'm going to be adding the water. We're looking at about 800 grams of warm water. I went ahead and heated this up to about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. There's 800. Then I go ahead and typically I go ahead after that and mix the water and the starter up a little bit. Now a lot of people use bottled water, and although that was originally in a bottled water container, it's just tap water. I found that I can just take tap water and fill up a bottle and let it set on the counter overnight, and all the chlorine will dissipate in that, and I've never had any problems using just regular tap water versus bottled water or spring water or anything like that. The spelt flour, you can use whole wheat flour if you want, or rye flour, anything to, or you can just use all the bread flour. But I like using spelt because I think it gives a good flavor. And we're looking for 160 grams of this. If you go over a little bit, you can always steal a pinch back out. After adding the spelt, you can mix that in a little bit as well. And then we're looking for 1160 of bread flour. Another package here. Flip it over, so we'll bring that back out. Okay, so we have 1160 grams of flour. I'll mix all of this together now and try to get everything incorporated, and then we will Let it set for half an hour for an autolyse before we add the salt. I typically mix by hand, so I usually put some sort of a glove on and just mix the water and the flour and the starter together into a wet dough. This formula gives us a finished dough of about 67% moisture. And that's taking into consideration the moisture of the percentage of moisture of the starter, and as far as how much flour and water it has. Now some people hold back a little bit of the water to mix in with the salt so that it kind of goes in and mixes in better. I've done it both ways, and I don't mind mixing it this way, even though it's a little bit harder to do. Great way to build up arm muscles. You can kind of see what we're getting. Kind of a shaggy, wet dough. And as this hydrates for about a half an hour during the autolyse, that will make it a little bit easier to work with. Not quite so stiff. I also put a little bit of olive oil on the sides of the container before I started, so it's not sticking nearly as bad as usual. Should put some on my gloves. Okay, that's what we end up with, and we'll cover that and let it set for about a half an hour now. While we're waiting for the dough to hydrate, we will measure out our salt, which in this case is 32 grams. So we'll tear that out. One thing that I like to do with the sea salt is to use a mortar and pestle to kind of break it up into a little bit finer granules than what you get right out of the package. That helps it mix with the dough a little bit better. So here's 32 grams, and just kind of break that down into more of a powder. Now we'll just wait for the dough to be ready and we'll add that in. Okay, 30 minutes is up, so it's time to add our salt. Got it ground up here, so I will mix this in. And then starts the chore of trying to blend it in. Usually I will blend it until I can't feel the granules of salt. Again, this is a great arm building exercise. I'm really happy that I put a little bit of oil on the side of this container, because the dough's not sticking to it nearly as much as I usually see. Coming together pretty good. The way I like to mix this is the pull and push. and turn the container as I go. And it kind of looks like, to me, it resembles what you get in a nice mechanical mixer. If I could afford one of those larger mixers, I would have one. But until then, I gotta rely on my arms. I don't know if you can see this, but it kind of pulls away here where the salt hasn't been quite mixed in. And so I keep going until I don't see that kind of splitting of the dough. And that usually tells me that I've done my job. Also, I have one of these. If it was sticking to the sides, I can use it to scrape it down. This is a great little tool to have. It's just to pull it away from the sides if you need to. But fortunately, it's not giving me much of a hassle this evening. Starting to come together and looking pretty good. Go a little bit more to make sure I get all that salt worked in. When it all starts to come together, you can start to form the loaf into a little bit of a ball. I don't know if you can see that, but I just kind of tend to pull and turn, tucking the ends down below the loaf, or the dough. So I form a nice little ball like that. The next stage, we will cover this and we will come back and check it every 30 minutes and do a stretch and fold process on the dough that helps build the dough during the first proofing. And so we'll come back in about 30 minutes. Okay, the first 30 minutes is up, so we're going to take a look inside. You can see how the dough's kind of spread out nicely there. Typical stretch and fold process. I'm going to pull up on the dough, push it down, pull up again, push it down, and turn it, pull it, pull it. And you end up like that, and I like to do the same thing, kind of tuck the bottom underneath as I go around, form the dough back up into a ball shape. And this process can go on for a couple of hours typically. What I'm looking for when I get done is good gas bubble formation. Already starting to see a little bit of it. But it usually takes an hour and a half to 2 hours before you really start to see some good gas bubble production. But the dough's starting to really look nice. It feels really good. So we'll continue to do this for another 30 minutes and come back and do it again. And probably I'll do that for at least another 2 or 3 more times. We'll see how the dough looks. Okay, it's been another 30 minutes. I'm going to try another angle here to see if you guys can see what's going on inside there a little bit better. Dough's really coming along nicely. So once again, we're going to pull, lift up, turn it, lift up, turn it, lift up. Starting to really get some good formation on the dough there. Again, I like to go around and tuck everything underneath. Really starting to get some good structure on the dough. Okay, it's been another half hour. Let's take a look and see where we're at. Dough's looking pretty good. We'll get to see what we have here. Definitely getting a nice structure in the dough. Some gas production really starting to show up. So typically this takes about 2 hours, but it can go quicker or a little bit longer depending upon temperature of the water that you use, the temperature in the house at the time. As I turn this around to start forming it back into, I don't know if you can see it, but we're starting to really get some bubble production there. So I'm assuming we'll probably be about ready to go in another half an hour. Actually looking pretty good right now. Really good, actually. So we might just go ahead and let this set probably for another 15 minutes or so, since it's really starting to look good. That's what we want to see. So you tend to listen to the dough versus the clock. And so we'll let that rest for a little bit. We'll weigh everything out for 4 loaves. We'll get our bannetons ready and get everything set up. Just wanted to make sure that you could really see here. I don't know how well it was showing up when it was on the tripod, but there's the bubbles that we're wanting to see in the dough before we go to set up our loaves. So it's coming along really nicely. Part of the prep now, as I'm waiting for the dough to finish up, is to get our working surface for forming our loaves. Get that ready. Just a cutting board, basically. I'm going to work some flour into it. I don't like to put too much flour on. I like to have enough in the area where I'm going to be setting the loaves to proof a little bit. I like to have more flour on that, but not so much down here where I'm actually going to try to form the loaves. With the 67% moisture that we're working with, not so much a problem of it wanting to stick, so I don't need as much flour. Just a little bit worked into the surface. push it back for where I'm let them set. I don't like to get too much flour on there for a couple reasons. I mean, number one, when I'm forming the loaves, I don't want to get too much flour in there, which will cause the dough possibly to separate and not look so good. So we should be ready to go in just a little bit. Another thing that I want to show here is that I don't know if you can see that real well, but I have usually have my containers weighed out. And in this case, this container empty weighs 473 grams, and that's without the lid. So if we take the lid off, we can see that we have 3129 of the total weight. And if you subtract the 473 from that of the weight of the container, you end up with 2656 grams of dough. And so if I'm wanting to make 4 loaves with that, then I just divide that out, and it comes out to where each loaf, when we are weighing them out, should weigh about 664 grams. And that way I can make sure that all of the loaves weigh the same. And that's just a nice way to have an idea on what the dough by itself weighs when you can subtract your weight of your container from it. Okay, we're ready to go here, and got the container of the dough just out in the picture here, but I'm going to basically now what I'm going to do is weigh out each individual loaf, and keeping in mind what our weight was, I'm going to be looking for about 664 grams per loaf on this. So I will be cutting the dough and placing it on here. I should have boiled that down a little bit first. We're looking for that total weight. Getting real close there. And just a little bit more. Not too much, of course. That looks about right for the first one. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that off. I plop it down here. I should have a little flour in my hands here. And just basically do a rough forming for the first loaf. And you can really see the bubble structure in the dough. And so now that I have that, I can scrape that up and push it back in the corner there for the first one. And weigh out our second one. Again, we're looking for 664, so we're getting pretty close there. Real close. Somewhere in between, of course. There we go. A little sticky. Should have floured up my hands a little bit better. This is just a first forming. Wanting to put a little bit of tension on the surface tension on the dough. That's what's going to help us form our final loaves. And a little bit more. Just a little bit too much. Pretty close enough, but I try to be exact as can be. I think I'll get a little bit of flour this time in my hands. Pull that off.
know if you can really see that, but as I roll, I'm kind of tucking underneath. There's lots of videos out there that kind of show this technique, or techniques like it anyway. This is just what works for me to get these loaves formed into a nice tight ball. And basically pick them up then and set them. Now, hopefully, if I did everything right, this last one should be pretty close. Oh, look at that, 664, perfect. That's what we wanted. Probably put a little bit more flour down. Make sure that that's not going to stick as it sits there. Take this last loaf and pop it right there. And now, like I said, we've got some surface tension on all of these. We're going to let them set. And what I like to do is let them set for about 15 minutes or more. I want to get this to where it's not so tacky. Get a little bit of a skin going on it. And when I do the final loaf forming at that point, the little bit of skin that's formed there from it being in the air will allow it to be able to give a really good surface tension when we form that last loaf, and that really helps with the oven spring when you score the loaves. When you score them after they've got that good surface tension, it really allows for them to expand out. And then basically it comes down to how much you proof them in your final proofing as to whether they're going to, expand out just about right, or if you've underproofed, it might overexpand. That's where that last little bit of timing comes in when you really are trying to judge where it's at. We'll be doing that tomorrow morning when we fire the oven. Okay, and while we're waiting for the loaves over there to get their skin formed from setting there in the air, we go ahead and get the bannetons ready for the loaf. I use brown rice flour to put in the bannetons to keep the loaves from sticking. A little bit more there. And I also have a plastic one here, but it works a little bit differently. Sometimes I have to spray that down, but we'll see how that goes. Essentially, you just want to make sure you get everything covered with a little bit of flour. Leaving a little bit in the bottom. If it's a little bit too much, it's okay. You can brush it off when you get ready to put the loaves in the oven. Got that one ready, and like I said, this one can take a little bit more, can be a little bit more of a pain with it being plastic, but it doesn't necessarily stick as well to that. So sometimes I spray that, but I think we're okay. If I need to, I can spray that down and prep it a little bit better before we put the loaves in. Okay, these have set for a little while, and I think they're probably about ready. Maybe still a little tacky, but we'll probably be just fine with them. Another tool I like to have is this little scraper tool. I don't think anybody that bakes bread should be without this. If you wanted to lay out all of the whole batch of dough and separate it out with one of these, it's really good to do that, but I tend to just cut it out of the container now. But this works really well for scraping your dough off and flipping it over to start the form. So anyway, we want to try to press out some of that gas that's formed, because it will build up a little bit more as it goes through its final proofing. So stretch out this dough. And I think the first one we're going to do is a round loaf. So there's all kinds of videos on how to form a loaf. There's no 100% foolproof way that works for everybody, so I just tend to start working them. Again, you're wanting to put some really good surface tension on the loaf so you have something to hold that dough in there, and then when you score it and it's baking in the oven, it really can give you a good spring. So here's our first container. And you want to turn it up and put the tension side down, and so that's ready to go. And I like to use kind of like a shower cap, a little bit of elastic, put that over the banneton. That will hold in the moisture, keep the loaf from drying out. So that one's done. And spread a little bit more flour there. Not too much, just enough to keep the dough from sticking. And the next one's going to be a longer loaf. With this being a drier dough, it's a little bit stiffer. Anyway, just tend to tuck that in. Pinch the ends here pretty good, as much as I can. That looks pretty good. Happy with that. Got a little bit longer banneton here. Oops, almost put it in there the wrong way. Okay. Same thing. Put a cap on it. And the last ones are longer and kind of oval. We have that plastic one, which I did spray with some water to get it to have the flour stick to it a little bit better. So we can form up the last two. Putting down a little bit of flour again each time, but not too much. And again, there's no wrong or right way, as long as you end up getting the surface tension that you want on your final loaf. That one doesn't necessarily have to be as long. Set that in there. Looks good. Cover that. And our last one here. Again, kind of push out some of the gas. I used to think you had to be a little bit more gentle with the loaves, and I've kind of learned that you really don't have to be as gentle with them as I always thought. And that looks pretty good. Place it in there. And put our last shower cap on there. And now what I'll do is I'll set that with the others, and I tend to let them set out for about 20-30 minutes, and then I will put them in the refrigerator for the night. so they can cold ferment. Okay, again, here's our loaves just about ready to go into the refrigerator. Got a few more minutes yet, but they'll go in there for a cold fermentation for the night, and we'll pull them out tomorrow between an hour and a half to 2 hours. These are smaller loaves, so it won't take a whole long time for them to warm up and do their final proofing. So if they were larger loaves, they were closer to 2-pound loaves, it might take up to 2 hours before they would be ready. But we'll see how they go tomorrow. You have to kind of try to, when you're using a wood-fired oven, you have to try to time everything out to where the oven's in the right temperature zone for baking, and your loaves are getting proofed about the same time, everything coming together at the same time, and it can be a little tricky, but we'll see how we do tomorrow. Okay, here we are the next morning. Our loaves that we made up last night are still in the refrigerator fermenting, and it's time to come out here now and to light the fire and get the oven fired up and ready to go. It takes about 2 to 2.5 hours to get the oven fully heated, and then there is a cool down time for the oven to get into the baking range. When we're firing the oven, the hearth of the oven can get up to 700 degrees or better, and the dome is well up over 1,000. So you have to allow it to cool down to get it back down into the baking range. And we try to have several things ready to go and try to utilize as much of the energy from the oven as we can. Again, the oven is a Cob oven. We built this about 4.5 years ago. It's typical of most Cob ovens in that you do develop some cracks from the heating and contracting. It expands and contracts with the heat. So we have some cracking mostly on the outer coating, which there's an insulating coating that's, and in this case, that's cob mixed with redwood bark. And then there's an outer layer of lime plaster that we put on there. So anyway, we'll go ahead and try to get things going here. I do want to mention that the book that we used to learn how to build this oven was called Build Your Own Earth Oven, and I will put some information up on that so that anybody interested in trying to make one of these can find the book and can go ahead and give it a try. It will take you through every step that you could possibly think of, and there's lots of videos on the internet as well to give you some hands-on or some visual looks at someone building an oven using pretty much this method. Okay, for building the fire in this oven, I tend to go along with the kind of a upside down fire stack. Put the larger pieces on the bottom, kind of cross them up, and then you start to put some smaller pieces. Put some smaller pieces up on the top here. Okay, I did find some smaller pieces to put on top here. And we'll just go ahead and build that up a little bit. I got some finer sticks. And even a few leaves. So it'll smoke a little bit at first, but that'll get going. And then as those coals go down through the wood, it gets everything started. And then lastly, I just have this is a natural fiber. It looks like they infuse it with some sort of an oil. It's supposed to be all natural, not supposed to be anything harmful. So we stick that underneath there and get it lit and get our fire started. As the fire starts to develop and as it starts to burn, we will push it back further inside. You want to start toward the front of the oven and work your way back so that you can basically heat the entire hearth, and it also helps get the flow going through the oven. You have to have airflow for the fire to burn, and if it's not hot back in there, the air is not going to want to flow in as well. So it's a gradual build up so that you can heat this oven. Okay, as the fire starts burning well, you can slowly start to push it back inside the oven a little bit, and that kind of gets the air flowing through the oven like it should. And then another thing that I have to do as I'm getting prepared for the bake is I have this wood door that I made for the oven, and it's made out of wood, and it doesn't fit as well as it used to because it's kind of bowed and stuff, but it still does the job. But I don't want that later on when I'm baking to be dry, because it will burn because of the heat. And so I tend to go ahead and get it wet by sticking it in some water, a little wading pool that we have here, and I will typically weight it down in there with a fire brick so that it's sitting down in there. And then also when I go to bake, I will seal around the door using a wet towel. And so I have a towel that I throw in there and basically get it wet as well so that everything's ready when we go to bake. Another thing that I like to do once I have the fire going and push back into the oven bit is I like to take the sticks that I'm going to be using further into the burn and start getting them heated up. And so I will pile some sticks right there in the front of the oven, and every so often I turn them as one side gets hotter than the other. That's to prevent them from catching on fire. Might add that I'm using maple right now, but I've used oak. Just about any hardwood works best, but you can burn just about anything in here to heat your oven. But the hardwoods do work best. Okay, again, as you can see, as the fire really gets going, you can push it back further into the oven and add a few more sticks to the fire. I don't know if I can show it in there or not. I might have to wait until it's further along, but part of the way that you can tell that the oven is heated is that as you're burning the fire in there, you get quite a buildup of soot on the inside of the oven. And as the oven heats and that dome temperature rises, it gets to the point where it will actually start to burn that soot off and actually clean the oven. It's like a self-cleaning oven, to speak. And as that progresses, you will see it clear and go down the sides of the oven until it reaches the hearth, and you pretty much know at that point that you're good to go. So I'll try to get some better video of that as we go through this process. Okay, as we're going here, I'm trying to get a better shot. I think you can probably see back inside there that the walls on the back of the oven are still pretty black, and that's will start to change as the oven gets hotter. We're probably about a half hour, 45 minutes into the firing now. So in the next half hour, 45 minutes, we'll really start to see the top of the oven start to clear itself, and then it'll work its way down. And I'll make some shots of that so you can really see the effect. Here's a good shot. I just let the fire burn down a little bit so we can get a shot in there, and you can really see now how the oven is clearing the dome, making it ready for us to use. Here's another shot of the coals all spread out on the hearth and the dome pretty much cleaned off now, so we'll be ready to be putting some bread in here before too much longer. Okay, we've pulled the loaves out of the refrigerator. They've been in there, oh gosh, close to 12 hours or so, and we'll let them go ahead and start their final proof. The oven has coals spread out on it right now. I'll be going out in a little bit to pull all the coals out and to try to get the hearth to the right temperature to bake the bread. Okay, the oven floor has been cleared out. You can see the dome was clear, and basically I've swept it out and got as much of the ash out as I could and the coals. The last thing that I like to use is basically just a towel on the end of a stick, and I'll get that wet and I will mop the inside of the oven out. That kind of tends to get all the ash dust and any remaining little coals or embers that are in there out. And you can also use that if your floor is too hot and you're ready to bake. You can swab it down with some cool water and lower the temperature just a little bit to get you in there to bake a little bit sooner if you need to. Okay, I've kind of mopped out the floor in there. It looks pretty clean. Now it's time to kind of check the temperature of the oven. I don't know if I can get the reading on that. It's about 282 or about 286 or so degrees centigrade, or about 520 degrees. So we're not too far off from our baking temperatures. I'm going to go ahead and put our door on there and let the temperatures try to equalize a little bit. Okay, as I've been waiting for the bread to proof and the oven to cool a little bit, I brought out my table and I brought everything out here that we're going to need. Got my blade here for scoring the bread. I've got some cornmeal here to put on it. I've got some cooling racks. I've got the loaves themselves, and I also have a peel that's been floured to put the bread in the oven. So I think we're about ready. The oven's down to about 470, which for small loaves like these is just about right. Another tool that I almost forgot is my spray bottle for spraying the loaves once they're in the oven to help produce steam. So I think we're about ready. Let's go ahead and pull the oven door off and get going. Not going to try anything too crazy on the scoring. First thing I do is put a little bit of cornmeal. And then basically pull that off. Again, nothing too fancy on the scoring. And we should be able to pop that in the oven. Couldn't ask for a nicer day to be doing this. It's middle of February, or right at the beginning of February, but we're going to be about 80 degrees today. I went my blade.
ever slipped off of that like that on me. Of course. Okay, last one goes in. Just trying to stick to the peel a little bit. So the last thing I do is put a little bit of water in there for steam. And cover the opening. Put our towel in place. I had re-soaked the towel and the door just before I came out here to put everything in the oven, so the steam from the towel and the water that I sprayed in there should give us a good environment for oven spring. All right, well, we've got about 15 minutes has gone by, so let's take a look and see what we've got going on in here. Oh, looks like we did fine. So now it's just a matter of letting them go until they reach the color that we want, and I think we will have some nice loaves here. Okay, it's been another 25 minutes or so since we checked the bread, so I think they should be about done. Let's see what we've got. And there we go. 4 loaves right out of the oven, and I think they look pretty good. Okay, last thing to do is to cut into the bread and see what we ended up with. And that looks pretty darn good. There we go. So there you have it. We've gone through the process of baking the loaves, and I think they came out wonderful. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope that you have an inspiration to go out and try to make your own sourdough bread, either in your oven if you have one, or if you don't, there's other ways of baking them in your regular oven. So enjoy, and thanks for watching.